The following film is presented in its complete theatrical version. It was rated R by the MPAA and may not be appropriate for children under 17. It is rated TV MA-LSV and contains strong language, sexual situations, violence, and nudity. It is intended only for mature audiences. Viewer discretion advised.
I like steak.
That's just who I am. Your boy Ubi. I am Ben the Thunder. Tonight, you can call me Professor Ubi. It is Tuesday. It is a Tech Talk Tuesday. How is everybody doing tonight? Hopefully you got a chance to check out the premiere of Keith and 2 Yard's song. It was really good. It was outstanding stuff. And yeah, we need to give a lot more love to the creators in our community for that. Also, before we begin here, yes, I very much am enjoying the cool. Thank you very much, Shanty. I had somebody ask for some subscriptions to another guitarist. This channel is close to being able to do lives. They need a couple more subs to get there. Looks like he does some pretty good stuff, so I strongly suggest popping over there and dropping a subscription on him. Go to a video, leave a comment, tell them that Ubi sent you, and we will be all good. All right, so tonight we're going to talk about VSTs, and it's going to be a shorter talk because last week I didn't give really any room for a Q&A, so we will do a shorter talk this week and give you guys the room to ask questions. So what is a VST? Well, VST actually stands for Virtual Studio Technology. That's what it stands for. And what it is a designated system, a standard, if you will, that lets you add virtual instruments and effects into your digital music setups. Think of VSTs as kind of just, digital stomp boxes or digital amps or digital instruments that live in your DAW or in a host like I use in Cannibal Light. So instead of having 20 physical pedals on a pedal board, you could have 20 VSTs loaded into your DAW. Basically, it's kind of like having an unlimited pedal board with an unlimited rack space and all sorts of things that you may not be able to do due to constraints on cache and physical space as well. Now, what do VSTs actually do? Well, VSTs actually come in two main flavors. Now, we call them both VSTs, but they actually are slightly different. The first is a VST instrument, or it's sometimes known as a VSTi, and that's actually a VST that makes sound by itself. So think of like a synth or a drum machine like the MT Power drum kit that I use, or samplers that allow you to make music from the actual plugin itself. Then there's the VST effect, which we usually just call VST. And these are things that modify a sound that already exists. So these are things like reverb or delay or chorus or compressor or EQ or like a pitch corrector. And it also falls into things like amp sims. So THU or amplitude or neural amp modeler. Thanks for stopping by, Shanty. We appreciate that. So if you've ever used like Guitar Rig or GarageBand or something like that, um, even though those don't, they use their own plugin format, those are still behaving like a VST internal to them. So they're all kind of the same thing. Just what we call an actual VST is a standard for how to write the software for it so that it works in multiple different platforms. So kind of a history lesson on VST. VST was actually introduced by Steinberg back in '96. Before you had VSTs, there were some amp modelers, there were some sims for pedals and stuff out there, but they were all disjointed. They were all their own software pieces that were, you couldn't run them together, you couldn't chain them together, you couldn't load them into another program, those sort of things. Steinberg introduced the VST format, which was VST 1.0, which is very basic. It could only do the effect style stuff, so it could only take an input signal, process it, and send it back out again. Then in '99, they introduced the VST2 format, which is probably what you'll see a lot of things in. That added the ability to the VST-I, the VST instruments, and also standardized and codified everything. So that kind of lasted for about 20 years. Then in 2008, they released VST3, which allowed things like automation from inside of DAWs to work with it, dynamic input and output, so it could actually create ports for input and output on the fly. And most importantly for everybody else is they lowered CPU usage so that VST3s actually will, when idle, will if they're written correctly, won't use CPU time. So if you have like 20 plugins loaded, but you've only got, and you're bypassing all but like 3 of them, only those 3 are actually hitting your CPU at a particular time, which makes a massive difference, especially on a slower machine. Now, what is the actual difference between the VST2 and the VST3? Well, like I said, the big thing is efficiency. They also added MIDI pass-through for VST3, so and allowing for multiple MIDI ports, which means you can actually have more than one MIDI input going into the same VST in VST3. And it also added in built-in sidechains so that VST3 can actually do the same thing as like an FX loop for a physical amp, in that you could have a plugin that could go out into other plugins and back into itself and then back out for the output. It's not used a lot, but especially for things like an amp sim, you may want to do something like that to mimic that FX chain that you would get on an analog amp. So the other big thing, well, VST3 is actually maintained. VST2 has been discontinued in development since 2018. So all the plugins that are in VST2, that standard is not ever going to be updated or made any better. So those plugins need to be moved over to VST3 if they're going to be, able to use new features and stuff as they come out. Not everybody has ported their plugins from VST2 to VST3, and there's actually some issues using VST3 over VST2 in some cases. So it's kind of one of those, look closely at what you've got. A lot of them, to be honest though, a lot of the makers these days, when they release it and you install it, it installs both the VST2 and the VST3 plugin version. If you have both of them, I suggest using the 3 over the 2 because of the fact that it can be less CPU intensive. Now, I have a particular plugin that I used to use specifically, Amplitude 5. The VST3 plugin would not accept MIDI inputs, even though the MIDI input was there. I had to actually go back and use the VST2 plugin to get it to work with my MIDI setup. So it's one of those kind of a trial and error sort of things. So now, I'm sure that you're probably wondering, well, why do I care about anything about that? Well, I mean, obviously, needing to know the deep information on the VSTs probably isn't all that important for you, but knowing what they are and what they're used for is, because if you're going to do the digital chain like I do, you need to know what each one of these things are. Now, the older standard, the VST1 and the VST2, came not as a pre-bundled version. So if they had a bunch of files to support them, you may have a DLL in another folder, some additional stuff that gets installed on there. That whole thing together, all those files together, is the one VST. VST3 is actually also what's called a container. So all the files that support it are zipped inside of it, like a zip file inside of one file. So that's when you'll see just a .vst file by itself. So don't be confused when you're installing something that says it's a VST and you see a DLL file. That doesn't mean that you've got the wrong file. It just may be an older VST that isn't in the prepackaged bundle. So pretty much that is everything to know about VSTs, and probably more than you would ever need to know as far as what a VST is, what they came from, just the overall idea of what a VST is. So what I'll do now is I'm going to open it up and let you guys ask questions. And when I say ask questions, this is a fully open forum, so you can ask anything at all about digital change, not necessarily just about the VST that we talked about, not even necessarily stuff that we've already talked about in a previous Tech Talk. This is an open floor, so ask away of anything that you might be curious about. In the meantime, let me show you guys some swag. As I said, didn't get this on the live last night. So, but I did find it today. I found out where it had walked off. So I did indeed get my TED Talks Guitars sticker. And we got a replacement mug, the Embrace the Suck mug. This one is not pre-broken. So I would drink out of it, but I just got it and I hadn't washed it. So instead, we're just displaying it tonight. Does an effects chain matter as much with plugins as it does with physical pedals? And what should be added first, LED, etc.? Yes, it does matter. It matters for the exact same reasons as why it matters in an analog chain. Because when you realize that what's going on is the effects process in the order that you put them in. So that means, for example, if you run a distortion effect first, that means you're going to add a bunch of gain, depending on how you have it dialed into. You're going to add a bunch of gain and the distortion onto the signal there. So then when that goes into, say, like if your next one is a reverb effect, it's going to take all the transients from that increased gain, all the transients from the distortion, and reverb those sounds. Whereas if you've got it in the opposite direction, where if you've got a reverb pedal first into the distortion pedal, the distortion pedal is not getting your clean sound, it's getting the reverb sound. So it's going to add distortion onto those echoey, reverby type effects. So it's going to sound different between those two effects. So it doesn't matter from an actual from the fact that it's in a digital chain, but it matters just for the same reason as to why you place your effects on an analog chain. You would the same rules totally apply on that. Hey Ben, how you doing? It is very much an UBI shaped object. So did that answer that question? Yeah. So exactly, and you know, there's different. It's the same thing for any effects. For example, you know, throwing your distortion OD pedal in front of your amp allows you to hit the front of amp harder, which means you're hitting it with more gain going into that preamp. So you can potentially turn the preamp's gain down a little bit to maybe get a little bit more articulation out of it, a little more of a clean sound of it, as opposed to if you throw your distortion after the amp. You know, you're adding it. You're not utilizing that bump in gain for that front of amp sound to it, so you're going to get a different overall effect on it. See, that's okay though. Dropping effects willy-nilly is how you find really cool tones. If you're searching for a specific tone, like Brian, who is searching for tone, if you're looking for one specific tone, like I want to sound like this particular genre, then you will probably want to look at how they shaped their tone, and you're going to want to mimic it. So, but it's fun to just play with the effects, especially if you're in a digital environment, because you can literally just swap stuff around all crazy and not have cable goes from here to there and that sort of thing. Obviously, you haven't found it. Otherwise, you would have to change the name of your channel to I Have Tone. Found Tone. You're looking for basically getting Stevie Ray Vaughan's kind of that edge of breakup sound that he was getting with that. I know he ran, it was a Fender Twin, wasn't it? And I think he was running a little bit of an OD in front of it. I'm sure though, if you search out there, you can probably find somebody who has intimate knowledge of his setup that you could use that as a starting point for how to set your chain up. I have done game development in the past as well, Keith. I actually have a couple of games that sort of got released. Nothing that actually used music though. Mostly online browser games. Does anybody have any other questions they'd like to ask this evening? You've got a chance to pick Ubi's brain. So I know Ted was asking about getting his DAW to work and play well with the going through OBS. Speak on the mastering VST. Hey Obi, is it tough to add a volume pedal to controller? So Tokyo Labs is the one that I use for my mastering. I use two of their products. I used TDR Nova and TDR Koltenov. I always pronounce that incorrectly. Let me see if I can get. I'll get a link for you. Hang on just a moment. As soon as it decides to load. So that Lincolnov is it's a gate, a compressor, and a couple other things all added in together. It works real well for using on mastering. There's the link to it. That's a free one. And then also on that same site, TDR Nova is a dynamic EQ. So not only is it a 4-band EQ, but it also is dynamic. So you can actually set it up so that it only kicks in after a certain threshold is hit. And then 2 Yards asked about tough to add a volume pedal to a controller. So are you talking about like a MIDI controller? Like an expression pedal that you could use to vary the volume? Is that what you're asking about, 2 Yards? So for me, Keith, my mastering is mostly done through the mastering panel through Cakewalk. So that's actually where I do most of my work on that. It basically is VSTs. It's just embedded in Cakewalk. Okay, so yeah, 2 Yards, you absolutely can. So there is a plugin that I use called Blue Cat Audio, I believe. Let me make sure it's the right one. Make sure I don't lie to you as to which plugin I use for volume. Blue Cat's Gain 3. So that is the name of the plugin that I use. It will take a MIDI input and it will take a control change, and that's actually what I do for controlling how hot my backing tracks are. I'm not using a MIDI expression pedal controller, but I'm using something that emulates one on my touchscreen. So that means that an actual MIDI controller that has an expression pedal would talk to that particular plugin. So Blue Cat's Gain 3 is the name of that plugin. get you that. I'll get you the, there it is. So yeah, assuming the VST, if the VST allows a MIDI input, you can assign it by, depending on what you're working in. Like I'm working in Cannibal Light. Let me show you what the screen looks like for that. That is that screen. Nope, that is that screen. So if you see here, get this out the way. So I've got Blue Cat gain 3 here, and you'll notice that I've got a line coming. This is my MIDI input, which is from my my software MIDI device. But this, in your case, you would set the port up like I've got going to loop MIDI, but you would have your MIDI controller device would be on here, and you would select it. So that means this line is running from that MIDI device. So I link it in there, and then inside of the actual inside of the actual plugin, what you do is you would, where is it at? Show plugin parameters. So you can see the parameters we have in here, and there's a gain parameter right here. And if I go in here, I can have it learn the gain. So basically what I could do, there's a way to do the learn in here. I got to remember manual. Well, there's actually a way to do it in here. Got to remember where it is. There it is. So the little green button down here, if you click on this, there's a button here that says MIDI learn. So if I hit that button, what it's doing is it's listening for any MIDI input. So if I go over to my control panel here, I'm moving that slider, which is exactly the same as what would be the expression pedal. So you notice how the moment it received that input, it's like, okay, we'll link these two. So now as I'm going up and down, you notice it's going up and down. It's being controlled that way. So you would do the same thing with your expression pedal. You'd have the expression pedal plugged in. You'd go in here, you'd tell it to learn, and then step on the expression pedal, and it would go, oh, okay, these two sync together, and then that would allow it to be there. So then from that point, whatever is, it's a volume control now. It's gain. So that's off. -60 is off, or blasting up there for 300. So that's the exact kind of thing that you would do to work that in there. Who was it? Got the Behringer UM2, and I use it through my PC speakers or just the outputs on the back. So the UM2 is that's a true audio interface, isn't it? Pretty sure it is. Let me take a look at it, and I'll tell you exactly what you would do with that. Yeah. Okay. So yeah, it's a full audio interface. So what you would do for that, I don't know if it has its own ASIO driver. Well, first things first, I don't know whether you're on Mac or Windows. If you are on Mac, then you should already have real-time output from it. If you're on Windows, you would need to make sure either if it's got an ASIO driver, you've got it installed, or you set it up the way that we talked about with the ASIO drivers the other day, so that you can get the no problem, 2 yards, so that you can get everything set up. Good. If it's got its own ASIO driver, then you would run basically set it up the ASIO driver to go into whatever it is that you're going to use, be it a DAW or a container like I was talking about. Make sure that you take the time to go into its driver and set up so that your cache on it is low enough that you've got real time. You're going to want to get it down to 128 or lower if you can. But once those are done, if you monitor from the interface, you're only going to hear your raw guitar or microphone or whatever you're running through it. You're not going to get everything that's added into it via the plugins and those sort of things. So what you're going to want to do is run it through your monitors. In my case, it's headphones, but it can go into your speaker out or whatever there is. Because if you, like I said, you will get 100% real time by going straight from the interface here. But the problem is you're only hearing the interface. You're not hearing everything that happens on the computer. So you would just hear just a dry. So what you have, Keith, is your interface is a more advanced interface that has what's called a loopback. A lot of these cheapers do not have a actual loopback circuit set to them, so that doesn't necessarily come back into it. Like, for example, this cheap one, the Fifine here, does not do a loopback. But your interface is a more expensive kind, and so if you set it up properly, the headphone out that you get on the interface is going to be the return, which is called a loopback. It will be the return from the computer. So yes, in your particular case, absolutely does that. But I can tell at the price point this Behringer is, it does not do loopback. It might claim that it does, and I'll be honest, maybe they snuck it into the driver. That's another possibility. I don't have one to test with, so if you have latency, that means that you need to set up the your ASIO driver setup so that it works correctly, that it has that the words, Ubi, you have words, you can use them. Let me go to the settings over here for this. This is not what your driver will look like, but your buffer your buffer is probably high. So in the ASIO settings, you will probably, I'll show it as soon as I get it up. I'm just waiting for it to come up on my screen there. So in the ASIO settings, it's going to be something similar to this. This is voice meter. I use voice meter for my ASIO, but you'll notice right here where it's got buffering ASIO right here. And then there's a selectable number down here. Now, I'm actually not using 256 that's showing here. I actually have a different command line program that changes that information so that it works differently. So I can't really display that here. But a driver is going to look something similar to this, where you're going to have a buffer and you're going to have a number there. 128 in a perfect world is going to give you about 10 to 20 milliseconds of a latency, which is good enough for you to be able to play and not hear that latency. You're going to want to get it down low, 128 or lower. 96 is better, 64 if you can handle it. But once you start dropping that buffer down farther, what's going to happen is you will start hearing, you're going to start hearing all sorts of crackling and artifacts and nastiness in that signal if it doesn't have enough of a buffer. So what you'll need to do is you'll want to drop your buffer down until it starts to break up on you, and then bump it back up until it stops, so that you get the lowest amount of latency, the smallest possible buffer, without having any sort of a noise disrupt your signal in there. Like I said, if you can get it to 128, it's usually good enough. Lower than that is even better. So, but like I said, what you're seeing on the screen up here is not going to look anything at all like your driver. But the wording, the buffer wording, and the numbers are the important things, and that's what you're going to want to look for in there. Yeah. So that's most likely what's going to be causing your latency. If your buffer is as low as you can get it, and you're still having bad latency problems, it's going to be because maybe you're running too many things and your CPU can't handle it. Because obviously the more effects that you put on the chain, each effects has to process, so that takes a little bit more time, a little bit more time, a little bit more time. So there we go. Did I answer everybody's questions who have asked questions? Because we need to wrap it up, because Ted is about to regale us with his talking life and guitars. If anybody does have any additional questions, yes, adding a ton of effects will add latency. Like I said, every effect has to process. And so if you put a process in there, an effect in there that takes 1 millisecond to process, then another effect that takes 2 milliseconds, then another one that takes 1, another one takes 2, and another 1, another 1, another 1, you can add 10, 15, 20 milliseconds just in how long it takes to process each one of those things. That doesn't even include the time it takes for it to go through your interface into the processor and back out to it. So yes, you can put enough on there that it will, it'll add latency. All right, if anybody has any other questions, VUB@gmail. Give me I'm always there. I will always answer questions. And so there we go. Thanks everybody for watching. Up in the pinned comment, Ted's live stream. Let's all jump over there and get ready to talk with our friend Ted about guitars and life. Thanks for joining us, and we will see you next time.